everyone, and welcome to the next episode in the Future People podcast series. I'm Amy, and I'm the Future People Programme Employability Coordinator at the University of Law, and am heading to a criminal pupillage at Exchange Chambers in March 2024. I am joined again by Evie Smith. Evie, hello.
Hi, Amy. Hi, everybody. So I'm the FPPC at ULaw, which is a Future Pupil Programme Coordinator, and I'll be starting a criminal pupillage at Foundry Chambers this October.
In this episode, myself and Evie are going to discuss our experiences of interviews, both first and second round, and give our top tips for you guys, given that interviews are around the corner. I mean, many of them may have already started for some of you, or you found out about interviews. So we're going to share our top tips for interviews. Sorry to mention pupillage so soon after the deadline already of paper applications, but interviews come around quick. So I think it's a good thing to talk about. So we're going to start, I think, with first round interviews and discuss kind of our experiences of those and any top tips we have for them. So, Evie, what does a typical first round interview look like?
Oh, so it can vary from set to set. Some sets like to do just an advocacy exercise, but that tends to be less normal. Usually the first round interview will be that quick 15-minute sort of firing some competency questions at you, getting to know you in the informal sense. That usually is the structure.
You mentioned competency questions. What kind of competencies might they be asking for in a first round interview?
Ooh, so they'll usually springboard off your form. So always read your application form first and always think, have I been vague in a part of my form? Have I been a bit ambiguous? Or maybe it'll be something really interesting on your form that you think they might pick out. Otherwise, they're going to pick some really sort of abstract qualities that they will want you to evidence, such as tell us about a time you've shown initiative, or tell us about a time you've shown leadership, or tell us about your best piece of advocacy and why.
Yeah, and I think a good tip for this one is to pick maybe some competencies, say 4 to 5 competencies. This could also be based on the criteria that they have for their pupillage application process. I think which of my experiences best demonstrate that competency. So maybe it's analytical skills, maybe it's initiative or problem solving. And then if they ask you a slightly different competency, you probably can still, because you've thought about it, you can probably still link that experience to that competency. So go through your CV, as Evie said, and think, what competencies do these skills really draw out? I think that's something that's a really useful thing to do before a first round interview. Other than competency questions, would we maybe expect some legal questions, do you think, at this stage? Would there be a topical legal issue, do you think?
Yeah, that does tend to be the most common exercise. So if the Chambers sets you a formal exercise, that's usually what it will be. And it will usually be that you get sort of an article or a piece of news or a legal judgment, sort of maybe 20 minutes before the interview often. And you'll be told to read that, prepare sort of an argument before the interview, go in and present your argument.
So for one of my first round interviews, I got given a topic. I think it was a proposition and you had to argue for it. And I had to prepare that before the interview. So yeah, there may be a bit of an exercise to do in your first round interview. And also potentially a kind of legal question more generally. So in a couple of mine, I got asked questions about topical issues in the news that then related to the legal world. So I got asked about the Chris Rock and Will Smith incident, for example.
Absolutely, I did too.
Yeah, so that obviously is kind of bringing in a kind of topical issues, but in a legal way and testing how your brain works. What other kind of questions might we expect, Evie, in a first round interview? So other than competency questions, might we expect some random think on your feet questions in a first round interview?
Well, they'll want to get to know you within a very short space of time. So you've only really got 15 minutes to show the Chambers who you are and why you should maybe be in a sort of top 20% that gets a second round interview. So they're going to ask you things that are designed to test how you react and just show a bit more of your personality than would otherwise be apparent in a formal interview setting. So for example, I got, what fruit would you be? I got, how would your friends describe you? Convinced me to take up rugby. My favorite pour from my cafe work or something. And I remember when the interviewer asked me, tell us about your favorite pour. I had no idea what on earth they were asking. Didn't strike me that they'd be so interested in my job as a barista. But yeah, so it could be anything weird and wonderful.
Yeah, so similarly, I got asked if I could be any character in a film, what would it be? And I also got asked about a key conversation in history that I'd want to be a fly on the wall in. So what are these questions testing, Evie? They're not necessarily testing knowledge or what film I would choose. There's not a right or wrong answer to these questions. So what is it that they're testing?
I think it's testing how quickly you do think on your feet, sort of how your brain works, how you quickly sort of analyze and select options, and also just generally your character. So when you ask someone a really random question, you get to see that instinct reaction just really obviously. And that must be quite eye-opening for the panel. It just shows someone who they really are, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of first round interviews, I think the general point is that it's that getting to know you. It's quite a short space of time potentially. So it might be your motivations to the bar, some competencies, maybe a legal question or a topical issue. And as we've discussed, maybe one of these think on your feet questions. Is there anything else that maybe we could expect from a first round, or does that cover it, Evie?
I think those are the main issues that you're going to face. And I think it is important to bear in mind with the first round interview, be memorable. That's the key, because you're in a very big pool still at that point. When you get into second round interviews, you're going to be analysed really closely, and that'll be really good for you in terms of showing off all your skills. But for the first round interview, you need to sort of be memorable in a much bigger pool.
And I would have ready the answers to maybe some of the common questions, just in case they might still ask about your motivations to the bar, or why there are areas of practice that you're interested in, or why that chambers. I would still make sure that those kind of answers are fresh in your mind.
Absolutely.
Because you don't want to be caught out on some of the core questions. Don't prepare so much for potentially the niche questions that might come up, as in prepare, but don't forget, is what I mean about some of the more standard questions, because they do make an appearance in first round interviews. So second round interviews, and I think maybe at the end, Evie, will come to some more general tips about interviews.
Absolutely.
But if we discuss second round interviews first, often with second round interviews, you'll get a legal advocacy exercise. So as said, both me and Eve are going to the criminal bar. We're doing interviews for chambers that practice crime. And so bail applications, plea and mitigations were common exercises that we had to undertake in second round, and maybe first round. I had a few in first round. So do you have any tips, Evie, for bail applications, plea and mitigations, or advocacy exercises in general?
Absolutely. First things first, if you're nervous, that's completely normal. Barristers in court are nervous before they present. Everybody's nervous before a bit of advocacy. And this is more than just advocacy for everyone interviewing. It's obviously your dream job. So chambers understand that. And there's that horrible sort of cycle where the people that want it the most are probably going to be the most nervous because the most is at stake. But just allow your nerves to sort of drive your energy, really bring out that more sort of energetic, free thinking side of you. Take yourself into that interview room in a positive, you can do it manner. Your mindset is so important going into these exercises, because obviously you're trying to perform as a barrister in front of barristers, and you're obviously not a barrister, so you're very much in a detrimental position. And of course, the barristers will act as judges, and they are going to be very good at cross-examining you, grilling you, asking really in-depth, interesting questions in response to your points. So you're going to get tested. That's the second thing. Accept that this is going to be challenging. You're going to get tested, and try and see that as a good thing. If anything, even if you don't get the pupillage at the end of your second round interview, you've had the opportunity to be questioned by like a room of 6 really interesting advocates that will really make you think on your feet, develop your advocacy. And honestly, for me, going through about 30 interviews to get my pupillage, that for me alone was probably the best development in my advocacy over and above my advocacy training before then, simply because it is really sort of on your feet, pressurized environments, everything's on the line, and I've still got to hold myself together. But anyway, moving on to the bail application and the plea and mit, crib sheets will always help you. So prepare the structure. If you've never done one before, just Google it, watch some YouTube videos. It's all out there, all the resources, attend some webinars, and then just put a structure together that you're happy with. Put it on an A3 bit of paper. Take that into the interview room with you and just set it out so you can simply slot in the facts of each new exercise in each new interview. And then that will take away so much of the time spent preparing in the exercise. And also it will just give you that nice safety blanket and safety net for if your nerves really drive you into a bit of a spiral. You've got that together. You know what you're going to say. You've got the structure.
Yeah, I think my biggest advice for this would be structure. Absolutely. And if you can take that in with you, then that's brilliant. That will help with the nerves. The more prepared you feel, maybe the slightly less nervous that you'll be, you'll feel more prepared. And yeah, use the time they give you well. So whatever time they give you in preparation to do your advocacy exercise, use it well, read the papers, but then have a good structure, because you want to be able to signpost the key points, whether it's a plea mitigation or a bail application. You want to be able to take the panel through your line of argument and what you're saying. And a good way to do that and ensure that you're persuasive, which is the aim, is structure. And I use the analogy. There are other analogies that people use, but you don't want to start a bail application or a plea mitigation in the middle of your train of thought. It's like going into the cinema during a film halfway through. You don't know what the plot is, you don't know where it's going, you're not persuaded by any of the characters. Imagine that you're painting a picture. You need to start from the beginning and conclude well, and what will help you with that is structure.
Yeah, I think that's really important. You're telling a story. Make it interesting. Always remember how many people these people are interviewing. They're going to have to sit through a lot of kind of boring interviews. Try and be the person that really makes them sit up and think about what you're saying. Make it punchy, make it persuasive, as Amy says. And then you'll do fine. You'll do fine. Just always remember, make it interesting. Try not to be boring.
Also, with advocacy exercises, they may throw in an ethical problem. And I think go into these interviews with some thoughts on what ethical problems could be posed in a bail application or a plea mitigation, and how might you tackle them. Know the codes of practice, know the GTs, because they do arise. I had a couple where ethical problems did come up, and I think that is becoming increasingly more common. So do be aware of that.
And do remember, there's not always a right answer to these problems. They're designed to make you panic a little bit and be, I don't know what the right thing is to do. That's the idea of them. You're not supposed to instantly know the right answer, but go with your gut. Really analyze the problem. Look at the core duties, as Amy said, and you only need to know those first 10. Don't worry about reading the entire handbook, just those first 10 core duties of being a barrister. Remember that your number one duty is always to the court, but you also need to promote your client's interest and always protect their confidentiality. And anything that will mean that you can't do those things will probably mean you have to withdraw from a case. So those are the basic principles. And then it's just use your gut instinct, talk the panel through your thinking. That's another really important point in an interview. Show them your thinking process. That allows them to get to know you, get to know how your brain works, see your intelligence, see your potential so much more clearer than if you do all your working out in the head and don't bring it out on paper. Think like maths, where you get so many points for working out. Yeah, and even if you get the answer wrong, your teacher will always say, show me your working out and I can give you at least 50% of the marks. Yeah. Same principle here. It's not always about the right answer. It's about showing your thought process. So chambers know after a good 1 year pupillage, they can mold you into the kind of person that will have the right answer.
Absolutely. And other than these legal advocacy exercises, Evie, what other type of questions were you asked in second round interviews? Can you remember? I still got some competency questions in second rounds, and I also got some legal, so about laws and like what law I would change or that kind of question. Did you get any of those?
Yeah, definitely. Everything seemed, for a lot of my second rounds, everything was just a lot more in-depth, and I received a lot more pushback from the panel. So like with my advocacy exercises, usually the intervention, they would push you as far as they think you can go. So if you find yourself in front of a really combative panel, you feel like they're not giving you a break, it's often because you're doing really well. You're good, and they're seeing just how far they can push you. Otherwise, in second round interviews, they'll be firming up any of the loose parts in your application. So if there's anything in there that they're a little bit concerned about, second round interviews is where they're going to drag it out of you. So again, it's being prepared. If there are any weaknesses in your application, just make sure you can discuss them confidently and you can show that, you're on track to be an excellent pupil barrister.
That leads us quite nicely, Evie, on to maybe discussing some more general tips that we have for both first round and second round interviews about how to prepare yourself and how to then be in that interview. Do you have any more general tips for both rounds?
Yeah, definitely. Remember the context here of the panel that you're meeting. They are all individuals. Chambers is very different to a law firm where they'll have a set couple of people that recruit everybody and that decide everything together. Pupillage panels, it tends to be different people in different interviews on different days. Maybe for second round interviews, you will have the same large committee. Often it is very individualistic in who gets to pupillage. A lot of luck is involved. A lot of it is whose personality meshes with another personality, who's on their best that day, who's not. And I can say, having been in a lot of interviews and receiving a lot of rejections, some interviews will be a complete car crash. And I know, having come out the other side, that is not a reflection on me. It's a reflection on the person I brought to the interview room on the day, which can always change and it can always be improved. So rejections after interview, don't take them too personally. It could just be the panel you're meeting. That's my first sort of tip for you guys, I think.
Yeah. I mentioned preparation. I think there is something that you can start as early as possible. So maybe for people applying next year, but also this year, that legal topics, as we've discussed, will come up most likely. So it is a good idea to stay on top of legal news, what's being discussed in the legal world at the moment. And there are various ways you can do that. One of the things that I liked a lot was the Inner Temple Current Awareness newsletter. Yeah. So it's brilliant. You can read it online, but you can also sign up to it, which means, and I still get them now, I get an email every day from the Inner Temple Current Awareness, which outlines some articles that are legal related or outlines particularly interesting cases. And it's a great way to keep up to date with things. There's Counsel Magazine. There are various podcasts. The Advocacy podcast is one. Law in Action. I don't know if they've done any episodes in 2023 as of yet, but they still highlight some key topics. So do try and keep up to date with legal news and legal topics as they will come up. But do you have any advice, Evie, about if maybe they ask you a question on a legal topic that you're not sure about? What would your advice be? Is there a way that maybe you can structure your answer that would enable you to answer it persuasively, potentially, or maybe you know about the legal topic, but not enough to answer it as maybe you think well. Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, so there's a little cheat sheet I know of how to approach any kind of legal sort of debate question, be it, convince me to start smoking. Obviously, most people know what that is, but times that by 10 into something complicated. You've maybe seen it on BBC One for 10 minutes whilst your mum had it on in the evening, but you don't really know more than that. Or you've read one article on it and you're worried that everybody else going into that interview has read the full novel on it. So what I really suggest a good structure is in that situation is for your 3-point structure. So convince me of X. 3 points can be, firstly, on a practical level, and then you can talk about whether a certain policy or a certain law or a change, whatever it may be, can be enforceable, will work in a real life context, and you can argue a point along those lines. You can then move on to, secondly, an economic point. How much will it cost? Is it cost effective? Who's it going to impact in the economic sense? And then thirdly and finally, you can talk about the ethics of a particular policy and form an argument from that. So you can talk about who's it going to impact? How is it going to impact them? What might be the negatives and the positives of a particular law, policy or change? So that's just a little cheat sheet for you to get that 3-part structure.
Absolutely. I think that's really useful. And also in terms of preparation, for me, it helped getting people to ask me some questions and saying it out loud, whether that's in a mock interview or just more generally around the house, practicing saying out loud, why do you want to be a barrister, or a time that I've demonstrated interpersonal skills. Because you might think you know exactly why you want to be a barrister, or you think you've articulated a really good answer to X, Y, and Z, and then you try and say it out loud and it just doesn't flow how you expect it to. So the more that you think about it prior to the interview, and I think I've said this before, and I don't mean you want to sound rehearsed or scripted, but you do want to have thought about it. You want to have articulated it in your own head so that when it comes to the interview, you're saying what you actually want to say. I think it's sometimes easy to not actually get across what you're trying to get across.
Absolutely. And I completely forgot I did this, Amy. I used to send myself, voice notes.
Yeah, that's such a good idea.
Of my answers. And then I used to maybe wait a day and listen to them. And you can just pull out so many of the issues. It's far less scary than recording yourself and then having to watch yourself on camera. So I'd say that's a really good tip if you don't want to have to record yourself, but record your voice and then listen to it back. And it's really helpful to sort of iron out those kinks that you just don't want in your advocacy and in your question answering.
That's a brilliant idea. And also to notice whether you use any filler words.
Absolutely.
Or is there a particular way that your intonation is not maybe being as persuasive as it could be? I think that's such a good idea. And I'd recommend that to anybody, actually. Listen to your answers back and give yourself feedback. I think that's really useful, because it's not until you practice, it's not until you do it that you know what you're going to say, really. It's difficult. So preparation is one of them. And then in the interview room, we've touched on nerves. It's so understandable. Of course, you're going to be nervous. As Evie said, the stakes are high, so it's nerve-wracking. But try and be confident and believe in yourself, back yourself, positive self-talk, and
Superman pose.
Yeah.
Works every time. Look
in the mirror before you go and say, you've got this. It sounds cliche, but confidence is important. You want to be able to demonstrate and sell yourself. And you need to, even if inside you're really not feeling confident and you're really nervous, try and be confident. Remember that they've invited you there for a reason and that you're there. They want to get the best out of you, even if it doesn't always come across. And remember that and try and go in with confidence.
Definitely agree with that.
So any other more general tips, Evie, or do you think we've covered most of the big ones?
Make sure when you're going to each chambers that you are treating each interview as its own application to that chambers. Make sure you're really going in on the interview day with your sights on that chambers. Make them feel that you want to go there. Make them feel like you're passionate about their work. Do your research. Because they won't be interested if you've not done that work. They really won't. Yeah. And it will come across very quickly if you don't understand the place you're applying to. I know pupillage applications, the way they structure the cycle, it can make them seem different to other job applications that you would do maybe one a month throughout the year at different times, different deadlines. But remember, it's the same. Even though all the applications go in at the same time, each one is a separate job application. You need to seem like you really want to go to the chamber that you're interviewing at.
Yep, I'd agree. And another quick thing from me is that see each interview as a learning curve. You don't want to dwell on them, especially if you think maybe they haven't gone to plan.
Oh, definitely.
But I would say maybe write the questions out that you got asked, because if you're not successful with pupillage this year, then it will be really helpful next year to know what questions you got asked, or even for your next interview. So I definitely learned things after my first interview about what I could have done better, and without dwelling necessarily, use that as interview practice for your next interview and think, what could I have done better, and how am I going to approach this interview maybe differently to hopefully achieve better results. So that's another quick tip.
Definitely.
But does that cover the main points you have, Evie, before we round up?
I think so. I think that's good to get you all started on your way.
Well, again, thank you for listening, and I hope you found it useful. Best of luck to those of you that are going to be having interviews over the next couple of months. As we've said, back yourself, go in with confidence, and wish you the best of luck. Until next time, goodbye.
Yep, you got this. Bye.